In this tutorial, we'll be looking at the eFORMz translation file editor for translating tables in eFORMz into different languages. So let's say, for example, that you have an invoice and you're going to have different languages required for that particular invoice. In one case, you might have an invoice that's going to Mexico and you want it to be in Spanish. Maybe you have an invoice headed out to Russia, you need it to be in Russian. Well, the data from your application software output will be in those languages, presumably, but what about the labels on your form? If you have a sold to, for example, you're going to want that to say sold to in Spanish and sold to in Russian. Well, a really easy way to automatically translate everything based upon the data coming in, based upon, let's say, a country code, for example, which is what we're going to show in this tutorial, is to create a group of dictionaries for the languages that you're going to translate. So in the translation file editor, which we have open on our screen, you can have a base dictionary, which is basically going to have just your base entry keys, which will be, for example, sold to, shipped to, remit to, order number, things like that. In English is what our base is going to be. That's our base language. And then what you can do is add dictionaries that'll have the different languages and the matching keys. So for order number, for Spanish, it would be número de pedido. And obviously, you would go on down the line with the different keys. So we have the translation file editor open. How exactly do we do this? Well, I went ahead and created a translation file earlier, and it's always an XML, and I'll show you how we go about doing that. But let's open that up and just to show you what it'll look like. And if you see down here in the bottom right, we have a variety of buttons, and we'll just select open, and we can go to wherever it is that we have placed our file, and I just have made it. It's called translationsfixed.xml. And if you want this particular file just to use as your own sample for your own template, you can ask a Minisoft support representative. Open that up, and there we go. We'll see that I have my base over here on the left is just all of my English terms. I have a Spanish dictionary, which has the dictionary name of SP. I have a Chinese. This is traditional Chinese. We support traditional and simplified Chinese, but traditional is the more complex, and so here it is. And I have CH as the dictionary name for that. And then we have Russian over here, and RU is the country code that we decided to give to this particular dictionary. So I have all these. How did I go about making this? Well, it's fairly straightforward. There's really only two buttons you need to use, and that's new row and new column. So if you wanted to make a new dictionary, you would select new column, and it'll ask you for the dictionary name. And let's go ahead and just give it a name, and just say name for now. Okay, and there you have a new column, and it's got all the rows here that you can fill out. So pretty straightforward. You can of course add a new row, simply by selecting new row, and it'll add a new row to every column that you have created, every dictionary. So again, just to reiterate, you'll always have a base, and you'll always have dictionaries that will match up with this base value. So if you were starting from scratch, you would just say new column, that would be your dictionary, and then what would show up would be your base, followed by your new dictionary, and you could add rows, and of course columns. So that's sort of how it works, and to edit it, you can just select and type. We'll just enter sample here for now. And you can use the tab button to move over, and double clicking will allow you to enter something in. And you can of course edit values. So if I want to say, instead of phone, I want to say telephone, just edit the value like so. Of course we want to keep it as phone. So there you go. And it's that simple. So real easy to edit and add values. So when you want to save it, you would say save as. Of course, if you've already created the file, you can select save. But the first time, you'll select save as. And I recommend always saving it with the .xml extension. And the reason I recommend that is if you don't do that, it'll just save it, and it's going to save it as just a file that can only be edited in the translation file editor. It's going to have the XML schema. It's going to have the node tree and all that. So it's going to be in XML format. It just isn't going to have the extensions, so you're going to try and open it up in Notepad or Notepad++, and it won't be able to open up, and it'll be confusing. Or it will open up, and you'll see that it's XML, but it's not saved as XML. So just to bypass that confusion, I just add the XML extension here. It's a tip. You don't necessarily have to do it, but I just think it's easier. And once you have that, you can select Save. But I don't want to save this since I've made some changes I don't want to keep, so we'll cancel out of that. And what we're going to do now is, now that we have shown this, the translation file, we're going to take a quick look at the eFORMz configuration file, because we're going to need to add a declaration to our eFORMz config user file, which is in our Minisoft eFORMz 6 folder. And we'll take a look at that next. But before we do, it's important to note, how do we open this eFORMz translation file editor? How do we bring this utility up? It's under Minisoft eFORMz 6 jars. So under the Minisoft eFORMz 6 jars folder, you'll see a translate editor.jar, a translate editor jar file, and if you double click that, it'll open up just like that. If of course you have Java installed on your local machine, which we recommend. All right. So we've looked at this. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at our eFORMz config user file, and then we will get into the eFORMz composer and show how this all looks in practice. Alright, so we have opened the eFORMz cfg_user.xml file, or eFORMz config user file. There are two files under Minisoft eFORMz 6 that look the same, but they're very, very different. One is going to just say eFORMz config.xml, and the other is going to say eFORMz config user.xml. We want to be using eFORMz config user. Under no circumstance should you edit eFORMz config unless you have been told to by a Minisoft support representative. eFORMz config user, you can edit it freely, although obviously we recommend that you know what you're doing, so to speak. And so if a Minisoft support representative has said, go ahead and throw this declaration in there, go for it. But just be very cautious when editing eFORMz config user, and please, under no circumstance, touch eFORMz config. So under Minisoft eFORMz 6, we have eFORMz config user, and it's just an XML file, and it should be blank if you have just recently installed the product, or if you have really left it alone, it'll be blank by default. It'll just have the XML declaration in it. And it'll have eFORMz configuration, this node, and it won't have anything in it. Well, we're going to add something to it, and it's a translate provider, a translator provider. And the translator provider declaration is going to look like this. It's going to say translator name equals, and here you can add an arbitrary name, because we're going to be translating an invoice in this particular example. I said the translator name would be invoice provider. Again, you could name it whatever you wanted, really. The class is listed here as well, and that's just the Java class. And then we have the file name. And the file name, of course, is where on your server or local machine, depending on where you're at, the XML file that we just created in the translation file editor is located. So what this is going to do is it's basically going to take you're creating a provider, you're giving the provider a name, and the provider is going to reference a certain Java class that Minisoft uses, and then the provider is going to use a particular translation file that you've created with the translation file editor, and it's going to need that exact location. So that is what's going on here in this declaration. And again, if you need this particular class information or this particular declaration, you can always ask a Minisoft support representative. Of course, if you freeze this video and write it down really quickly, you should be fine as well. So that is what we would need to put in the eFORMz config user to get this all working. Now that we have this up and running, we can open up the eFORMz composer and take a look at how we translate an invoice. Alright, so I have the eFORMz composer open here, and this is the project that we created in our three-part series on creating a new project using the document template, or creating a project from scratch using the document template. So this is that same project. So if you followed along with those videos and you have this project on hand, then you're really ahead of the game. If you don't necessarily need this project to follow along. Again, you could request it from a Minisoft support representative. But we're just going to show really briefly how we can get translations to work, and it'll work with any project. But this is just an easy sample that we have on hand. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and created a few data files that are different, that have different languages. Of course, Russian and Spanish are the ones I'm going to be showing in this example. And so what we'll do is we'll translate basically based upon the country code. So you'll see here in the top pane of the viewer, which is the data portion of the viewer, where the data is coming in, I have an XML data file, and I have a country code node here. So I have all these data nodes, ship date, due date, and I've already created the variables for all these, but I haven't created one for country code. So if I right click it and select add variable and just select OK, I've created the country code variable. And if we look at our variables window here in the bottom left and scroll down, we'll see I'm not picking anything up in country code. So it's blank, and I actually want to go ahead and select this and drag it to the top here, because it's easier to see and everything if it's at the top. And we'll just keep the name the same. So we have country code, this variable. It's not picking up anything. But what if we change the data file? And if I go to the Open Data button here and select it in the viewer and select From File, and again, I always recommend you select Files of type all files, and we'll see that I have a couple of other XML data files based upon languages: Chinese, Russian, Spanish. Let's go ahead and open Spanish up first. And we'll see that it's a little bit different. First of all, the country code is SP, so this is going to match the dictionary name. This is very important. Whenever you create a dictionary name, eFORMz is going to match the dictionary name to whatever it is you're using to translate. So, in other words, your country code, if you're doing your dictionary name by your country code and your dictionary name are going to be the exact same. They have to be in order for this to work. So my dictionary name was SP for Spanish. Well, the country code is SP for Spanish. So they're going to match completely, and it'll work that way. And if we look down at our variables window, country code is picking up the SP. So we have our country code information. And we'll see that obviously everything is still in English. I mean, we have the data is coming in Spanish. And as we can see clearly, there's some Spanish here. But my labels are still English, and that's what we want to translate. So how do I do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to need to add either variables and set their values to the labels, or if we in our data file, if we look down, if we have any labels, we can add those, and it looks like we do. We have one label here, and I'm just doing this as an example because there's two ways of doing this. Either your labels are already in your data file, in which case you can add the labels and translate them, or you can create the variables yourself and then set their value and then translate them that way. So let's go ahead and add this variable here first, since we have it, and we'll call it sold to label. Yeah, that'll work. And we'll go ahead and move it up to the top here so it's easier to see. There we go. So we have that, and this is the first method. So the first way of doing this is simply translating a label that you have in your data file. And if this label is going to be in every single one of your data files, no matter what the language is, then you can do this. So let's say, this is my Spanish data file, but I still have the English label. Well, you can translate it. And how would we do that? You would right-click the variable, and select Add Function, and Translate. And the Translate dialog box will display. And there should be a component translation provider, that's the default. But I also have invoice provider. This is the provider that I added in my config user file. That XML eFORMz config user file, I added that in invoice provider. So it's coming in, so that's working, that's good news. And the dictionary that I want to use is the country code. So this is why the dictionary name must match whatever it is that you're translating with. So my country code is SP, so that's why it matches my dictionary name SP. They're going to match, and so all the entry keys will come in. So we'll select OK, and look at that. If we look, we have translated the sold to label, and if we look at the variables window, we see the sold to label is now vendido a, which is sold to, literally, in Spanish. So it's working. So we have translated a label. But you'll see it's not the same on our form. And why is that? Well, because we have a static text element here. If we look at it and right-click it and select Edit, it's just a static text element that we added. So let's go ahead and scroll down. And instead of this text element, let's go ahead and remove that. And select Yes. And to this paragraph, right-click, select Add Text, Variable Value, and we will select the sold to variable from the variable drop-down menu, and select OK. And look at that, we have vendido a. And so we can, of course, change the font. Let's go ahead and do that, and make it look like the font that we have there. There we go. That looks a little better. So we have that. So what will happen is, if we change data files, this is going to change also. So when we have our Russian data file, for example, that we're going to look at in a moment, it's going to change the sold to whatever it is that is in the Russian dictionary. And if we go back to our English only data file, it'll look at the base dictionary we set, that base key, and it will see, oh, sold to, and it'll put that in. So it'll be automated. That's one way of doing it. If your labels are going to be in your data file, or you have some way of adding your labels to your application software output, this is a really easy way of doing it. But what if you don't have your labels in your data file? Well, another way of doing it, and it takes a little bit more time, but another way of doing this is if you right-click the variables and select Add Variable by Position, bring that up there, and you'll see the variable dialog will display. Let's go ahead and call this Ship To label. So we already did our Sold To label. We're going to call this our Ship To label. We'll go ahead and select OK, and we'll drag it up to the top here to make it easy for everybody to see. And it's got nothing going on. What we can do is, if we want this to say Ship To, we can right-click this Ship To label and select Add Function and Set Value. And here we can set the value to whatever we want it to be. And of course we want it to be Ship To. And if you're doing it this way, it must be exactly as you keyed it in the dictionary. So that is in the base dictionary. So I keyed in Ship To with a colon in my base dictionary, in my translation file, the translations fixed XML file. So I have to do it exactly the same here in the constant, or it won't work. It's going to match on exact criteria. So once we do that, we select OK. We've set the value. Now we can do is we can right-click this Ship To label, Add Function, and select Translate. We'll use the same provider, and we'll use the same variable of country code. And if we select OK, look at that. If we look at Ship To label down here in our variables window, we'll see it's now NVR A. So instead of Ship To, NVR A. So we have that. We'll go ahead and collapse that. How do we place it? Well, it's the same thing we did earlier. If we scroll down, we see that we had the variable. We'll go ahead and remove the text element for Ship To here. And instead, we'll right-click the paragraph, Add Text, and select Variable Value. And from the variable drop-down menu, we will select the Ship To label variable, select OK, and there it is. We'll go ahead and, like we did before, edit the font here so it looks good. Because we do want these to look good. There we go. So we have our labels. Two different ways of doing it. You can have it in the data file itself, the labels, and simply add the labels and translate them from your data file. Or you can create variables yourselves and set the value of them to be the value of the labels you want to translate, and then you translate them. Either way works. I would say that the second method is a little more time consuming, but again, both ways work, and if you don't have a way of getting in your labels in the data file, they both work just fine, both methods. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like if we were to open our Russian data file here. Let's go ahead and open that up. Look at that. So we see that the values changed. And don't ask me to read it or pronounce it, because I couldn't if you if you asked me. But that is the Russian for shipped to, sold to. And we see it's the same over here in our variables, shipped to and sold to. So we have the Russian portion translated. What if we wanted to show the English again? Well, if we went up and opened our English data file, we'll see that the shipped to and sold to are back in English. No country code is in the variable because, again, this is just our base. And so based upon our base keys, our natural default, it's in English. So we've shown here that there are two methods, but overall one way, and that is using the translation file editor. And once you've used that, setting the provider and the config user file. And then in the composer, there are two methods you can use. You can either pull labels from your data file and translate them, or you can create the variables that have your label information and then translate them, and place either one, whichever method you decide to do. And once they're on your form, their translation is automated.